Come on, Joel.
Easy, Tommy. Come on, calm down. Hey, you're my boy. Give me one, Tommy. Come on. Tommy, give me one. You're my hell out of here. Come on, Tommy. Give me one, huh?
I swear to God, you do that, I'm gonna break fingers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, come on, Lou.
Sweet. Hey, Tommy. Shalinga. Come on.
Sometimes in the wrestling business, you can believe everything you hear. Everyone in this industry will tell you that Louie Spicolli just talks and never listens.
The 1990s were a golden age for professional wrestling. The Attitude Era, Monday Night Wars, ECW's rise, and a boom in larger-than-life characters that turned the business into mainstream entertainment. But behind the flashing lights and sold-out arenas, the decade also produced a darker legacy, a generation of wrestlers who lived fast, worked hurt, and too often died young. The same period that created megastars like Stone Cold, The Rock, and Goldberg also left behind countless stories of talent who never reached their full potential. Among the most tragic of these was Louie Spicolli. Though he never became a household name, Louie's mix of skill, humor, and charisma positioned him as a rising star, just as WCW and WWF were battling for supremacy. Instead, his career was cut short at 27, making him a symbol of both the excitement and the devastation that defined 1990s wrestling. His life was short, his career even shorter. Yet his story captures the duality of professional wrestling in the 1990s, a place of opportunity and reinvention, but also of unchecked vices, brutal schedules, and an unforgiving culture that left far too many young performers dead before their time. Born Louis Mucciolo Jr. on November 10, 1970, in California, Spicolli began his career in the late 80s. Like many young wrestlers, he started as enhancement talent in the WWF, appearing on television in 1988 as a wrestler who would lose to established stars. While fans may have overlooked him at the time, those within the industry noticed his professionalism. He was reliable in the ring, could take a hit and make others look good, and carried himself with an energy that suggested he was meant for more than a background role. Spicolli became so reliable at putting over established stars on television that many of them specifically asked to work with him. But while that earned him respect, veteran wrestlers cautioned him against staying in that role too long, warning that being seen exclusively as enhancement talent could damage his chances of ever being pushed as a legitimate star in the WWF. Taking their advice to heart, Spicolli shifted his focus away from TV squash matches and instead built his name on the emerging West Coast independent circuit and in Mexico, where he could showcase his skills in a more prominent light. A year into his career, Louie's work on the independent circuit began to turn heads, drawing the interest of promoters in Alabama during the final days of the territory system. He spent 2 months with Continental Wrestling Federation, where he was paired with seasoned veteran Tom Pritchard in a tag team. Together, they worked an extended program against former NWA standouts Bobby Fulton and his younger brother Jackie. For Spicolli, it was more than just a booking. It was a valuable education. He would later describe the run as a crucial learning experience, one that sharpened his skills and gave him the confidence to step onto a larger stage in the wrestling world. By 1990, word was spreading through the wrestling world about a new promotion preparing to launch with the rare advantage of a national television deal. With the territory system in ruins and full-time work for wrestlers in the United States becoming scarce, anticipation was high for any company that could provide steady exposure and new opportunities. That promotion was Herb Abrams' Universal Wrestling Federation, which secured a weekly slot on Sports Channel America. From the outset, the UWF enjoyed visibility and hype, bolstered by the presence of several familiar names from the WWF's 1980s heyday, including Paul Orndorff, Bob Orton Jr., Don Muraco, and even Bruno Sammartino. At the same time, Abrams looked to balance his roster with fresh faces who could grow into homegrown stars. Rebranded as Cutie Pie Louie Spicolli, he leaned fully into the role of a brash, self-absorbed upstart, strutting to the ring and proudly declaring himself the world's cutest man. whenever he had a microphone. The UWF itself quickly floundered, cutting back its schedule and losing its Sports Channel America deal within a year. The promotion folded soon after, another casualty of the unstable wrestling landscape of the early 1990s and Herb Abrams' drug addiction. Yet for Spicolli, his brief stint as Cutie Pie proved invaluable. Even in a struggling company, the national television exposure gave him a platform to showcase both his in-ring ability and his personality, helping to raise his profile and set the stage for the next steps in his career. Over the next several years, Spicolli worked a wide range of promotions, honing his craft in front of diverse audiences. He spent time in Japan and then in Mexico with AAA, where he performed under the memorable ring name Madonna's Boyfriend. It was in Mexico where his career reached a turning point. In late 1994, Spicolli was booked in one of AAA's most high-profile factions, teaming with Eddie Guerrero and Art Barr as part of the villainous faction Los Gringos Locos. Spicolli had a tag match that took place at the landmark When Worlds Collide pay-per-view, a show that introduced many American fans to Lucha Libre and remains celebrated for its influence. Louie's performance stood out, earning him praise for both his timing and adaptability. That match would prove to be the gateway to the next stage of his career, as it directly led to the WWF offering him a contract. When Spicolli arrived in the WWF, the company was still searching for a way to recapture the mainstream popularity it had enjoyed during the Hulk Hogan era of the 1980s. The boom of the Attitude Era was still a few years away, and the promotion was in what would later be called its New Generation phase. In the late spring of 1995, Spicolli became part of that era under a new ring name, Rad Radford. The character, loosely sketched, was meant to be a wrestling take on the grunge music scene of the time, also claiming that he was Courtney Love's boyfriend. It was a one-note gimmick without much depth, but it gave Spicolli regular television exposure and introduced him to WWF audiences on a national scale. As Rad Radford, he was slotted into a minor storyline with the Body Donnas, a team built around fitness and physique. Playing off his softer build, Radford's angle revolved around his desire to join the group, leading to a tongue-in-cheek stint as a Body Donna in training. The gag ran until Survivor Series 1995, when he was unceremoniously expelled for not having the right look and losing their tag match. Beyond that brief storyline, Radford struggled to gain traction. He was used mostly as an enhancement wrestler on television, rarely earning wins over established talent, and the character never developed beyond its shallow gimmick. Louie's run as Rad Radford didn't last long, but while the gimmick failed to elevate him on television, it did allow him to build valuable relationships behind the curtain. At the time, the company's locker room was informally divided into factions that had little to do with the on-screen product. Two groups in particular dominated. The Clique, a tight-knit circle of Kevin Nash, Shawn Michaels, Scott Hall, Sean Waltman, and later Triple H, and the Bone Street Crew, BSK, a looser fraternity led by The Undertaker, Yokozuna, Savio Vega, and others. Though Spicolli wasn't a core member of either camp, his natural charisma and easygoing personality helped him earn the respect and friendship of the Clique members, relationships that would play an important role in the next chapters of his career. Louie's final match for the Federation came at a house show in New Haven, Connecticut on January 6, 1996. Shortly after returning home from the tour, tragedy nearly struck. A neighbor found him unconscious after he had overdosed on somas, a powerful muscle relaxant, and suffered a seizure. He was rushed to the hospital and spent several days in intensive care before ultimately pulling through. Though he recovered physically, the incident ended his run. Still reeling from the public scrutiny of its 1994 steroid trial, the company was hypersensitive to anything that might invite more controversy around drug use. Spicolli was released from his contract, but only on the condition that he not join rival WCW for at least a year. It was a setback that derailed his growing momentum and forced him to rebuild his career outside of the national spotlight. In 1996, Spicolli found a new home in Extreme Championship Wrestling, where he remained through part of 1997. ECW gave him the chance to truly showcase both his in-ring skill and his charisma on the microphone. One of the highlights of his tenure was a heated feud with Tommy Dreamer, which allowed Spicolli to demonstrate his ability to work a compelling storyline and connect with the notoriously passionate Philadelphia audience. However, his time in ECW ended on sour terms. Owner Paul Heyman discovered that Spicolli had been secretly negotiating with both WCW and WWF, creating a sense of mistrust. Compounding the issue was Spicolli's ongoing struggle with drug abuse, notable even in a locker room famously tolerant of such behavior. According to longtime friend and fellow wrestler Sabu, he had to intervene on multiple occasions, threatening to quit if Heyman fired Spicolli. Despite these conflicts, Spicolli's ECW run remains a key period in his career, highlighting his potential as a performer capable of rising above the limitations he faced in previous promotions. In late 1997, Spicolli signed with WCW, beginning what would become the most high-profile period of his career. After a slow start, he was placed in a storyline as old friend and Clique member Scott Hall's lackey, a role that allowed him to display his comedic timing and charismatic personality. His character soon launched a feud with veteran Larry Zbyszko, sparked by a memorable angle in which Spicolli stole Zbyszko's golf clubs, brought them to the ring, and destroyed them. This storyline set up a match at Super Brawl 7, scheduled for February 22, 1998, which appeared poised to be the biggest spotlight of his career. Tragically, the match never occurred. On February 15, 1998, just 1 week before the pay-per-view, Louie Spicolli passed away at age 27. In his 2001 book, Tributes, wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer recounted that Spicolli's friend John Hanna had spent the night with him and awoke to a terrible smell. When he entered Spicolli's room, he found the young wrestler lying on the floor in his own vomit, his body already beginning to discolor. The official death report listed the cause as a heart attack due to an enlarged heart. However, rumors quickly circulated within the wrestling community that Spicolli had died from a drug overdose, specifically a lethal combination of somas and wine. This theory has been widely discussed but remains disputed, leaving the exact circumstances of his death somewhat ambiguous. What remains certain, however, is that Louie Spicolli's death underscored the dangerous cocktail of pressure, pain, and substance abuse that defined much of wrestling in the 1990s. Eric Bischoff later commented that Louie Spicolli was almost always in possession of somas. Intended for short-term use, the drug is highly addictive, and Bischoff explained that many wrestlers would take it after shows to calm down from the adrenaline and exhaustion, often using it to sleep. He claimed that Spicolli would make a lot of runs down to Mexico, and he'd come back with a lot of goodies for the boys. This behavior, while alarming by modern standards, was emblematic of 1990s wrestling culture. The decade was defined not only by booming television exposure and high-profile storylines, but also by an environment of extreme physical demands, long travel, and a tacit acceptance of substance use as a way to cope. Spicolli's actions, supplying himself and allegedly others with painkillers, reflected the broader realities of an era that produced stars and tragedy in equal measure, underscoring how the pressures of the business often pushed young talent into dangerous territory. Louie's legacy is complicated. He was a talented wrestler who could entertain crowds, connect with fans, and elevate those around him in the ring. Yet he is also emblematic of a generation of wrestlers whose careers and lives were cut short by the very culture that celebrated them. His story serves as both a cautionary tale and a tribute, a reminder of the 1990s wrestling boom's exhilaration, its excesses, and the human cost behind the curtain.